Olá pessoal, a gente vai fazer aqui mais um episódio do Cast for Closers, o podcast para dominar inside sales e colocar suas metas no bolso. Hoje a gente vai falar com o Gabe Larsen. Ele era diretor de estratégia de vendas da InsideSales.com e co-host do podcast The Sales Acceleration Podcast. Como ele mora nos Estados Unidos e é americano, todo o podcast vai ser levado em inglês. A gente começa ele agora. So Gabe, it's a pleasure to have you on our podcast, man.
Yeah, hey, likewise. I appreciate the invitation. Excited to be here.
Cool. Can you tell to our audience a little bit about your experience at InsideSales.com?
Yeah, so I've been with InsideSales.com for 3 years. Previous to Inside Sales, I did a stint overseas, actually in the Middle East as a consultant, and did some investment banking in New York. But at InsideSales.com, I've worn a couple hats. I started our strategic consulting team that's now called Momentum. But recently I've moved over. I now run what we call our labs program, and that's all around our best practices and our research, kind of the latest and greatest within the inside sales space. So I'm pretty psyched about the new role.
Cool. And we today our main topic of our podcast is prospecting cadence. So it's a sequence of steps performed when a company tries to reach a potential buyer. So let's talk a little bit about this, okay?
Yeah, I'm excited. Let's do it.
Cool. So let's begin with the basic. For those who are not familiar, how do you define a cadence? And I love the definition that you gave in a webinar from Sales Hacker that I saw.
Yeah, So we've thought a lot about this, and we've been doing a lot of research. In fact, we've got a lot more research coming out about cadence, but we define cadence as a sequence of plays to optimize contact and qualification rates. But that definition usually deserves a little bit of explanation. Do you mind if I break that down just a little bit?
No, please.
Yeah, so when I say a sequence of plays, that's a multitude. That's multiple interactions that are all tied together. One of the big problems we see with cadence is it's a one and done. Right now, our research says that the average lead has one dial, one voicemail, and one email attached to it. And that's something that can't be, that's just not good enough. So a sequence needs to be multiple interactions. A sequence also implies a system. I'm on the road a lot, and I got to admit, I sit down with reps often, and I see them in their CRM, and I see in their home tab they've got all these tasks, and a lot of them are overdue. That's not a system, that's a mess. So ideally, you manage a cadence systematically, and you look at those multiple interactions over a specific period of time.
Cool, that's a wonderful definition. And by plays, what you mean? Like, what are the basic plays of a good cadence?
Yeah, so plays is, I usually like to think of building a good cadence by following, kind of a 5-step process. And one of the key steps is basically plays. And what we've done is we did a research study on communication best practices. We said, what communication are busy decision makers most likely to respond to? And in the data, we came up with really 5 things. 4 of them we consider core. That was phone calls.
Yes.
So that would be one play. Voice messages, that would be another play. Emails, and then social interactions. Those were kind of the 4 core plays that we discuss and we talk about in cadence. Now, there was kind of a side play, and this one's really interesting. We've not dove into it as much, but I've often just bucketed under the concept of gifting. And this is, if you decide to send somebody a gift like a coffee card or your company swag or a pizza, some other type of gift to see if you can't get in the door. And those are real for certain instances and for certain people. Those can be very effective in your cadence strategy. But for a core cadence, we consider those 4 plays of phone, voicemail, email, and social.
Cool. And giving a comment on the gift play, in the beginning of MeTime, we kind of did something like that without knowing. We just bought like a lot of copies from Delivering Happiness, the book that is incredible, and just sent to some customers, some potential customers. And we saw a good conversion or a good relationship being made from those plays. So maybe in a couple of markets or verticals, this can be used.
Yeah, so that's really coming on. That type of outreach strategy where you send a gift is a really powerful in an account-based model. And we'll talk a little bit about, I think here in just a minute, I want to get into it. You know, what are some of the factors that most effective cadence strategy? But a gifting motion is really optimal for more of a strategic selling motion, or what some people refer to as an account-based selling motion.
Cool. So let's go inside this point. What are the main factors that can affect the design of a good cadence? For example, the type of lead, if it's inbound or outbound, or maybe the sales model, if it's transactional or account-based.
Yeah.
So these are the two main factors. You probably have another one. Can you comment a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I usually recommend, based on our research, we have what we call a foundational cadence. And we maybe dive into that in just a minute. But I usually recommend to people that they start with kind of a research-proven best practice cadence. Again, we call it the foundational cadence. From there, depending on a couple of these different attributes, you want to tweak that cadence in order to hone in on your target market, your target audience, your target kind of company. So the typical attributes that affect a cadence the most are, number one is going to be who you are and who you're targeting. What I mean by who you are is there's typically going to be two things under this. One is, are you a high velocity model? Meaning, are you transactional? Do you have a short sales cycle? Do you is your total deal size relatively small? Or are you a strategic model? Are you a relational model? Are you an account-based model where you have a long sales cycle, 6 months, deal sizes of very large amounts, $250,000, something similar to that? That is going to really affect your cadence. Now, underneath that, you have that inbound versus outbound. If you're a transactional model, just focusing on inbound leads that are generated from marketing, it's going to be a different cadence if you're a relational or strategic model that's just going outbound and focusing on strategic kind of companies. So that understanding you step is very important when you think about it. The second big thing is, who are you going after? And what I mean by that is usually what I refer to as title level and title function.
Yes.
So think of that like, am I going after IT, a director of IT, or am I going after the SVP of IT? Am I going after a manager in sales, or am I going after the SVP or CRO? If you're going after, just as a quick tidbit, if you're going after lower level people, we find that phone is typically a better way to lead out. If you're going after a CEO, for example, it's going to be very difficult to get the CEO on the phone. You're going to have to go through a gatekeeper, etc. So yes. Other methods might be more appropriate. So those are usually the two things: understanding you and your position, and then understanding your target audience that you're going after. Those are the attributes that affect cadence the most. Okay,
and the cadence can be completely different based on these criteria, right?
That's right. Correct.
Cool. So getting deep again in the cadence structure, in January, how many touch points a good cadence have? Because you just told us that an average lead or prospect receive three touch points, like an email and phone call and then voicemail. But this is, I agree with you, this is just too little. Maybe in that week, the prospect was too busy to answer your call. Yeah. So how many touch points is like the the sweet spot for a good cadence?
Yeah, so interesting. We just ran an audit. This will be you probably find this interesting. We just ran an audit. We randomly went out to companies' websites and we submitted an entity 4,723 times to these random companies, and then we tracked how many times they followed up with us. Now, for this particular, if you look at all the decimal places, what do you think the average number of times that these people followed up with our secret shopper, if you will? What do you think?
I'm going to say 2.
2? It actually came out to be, and truthfully, we see this on inbound leads slightly different than outbound leads. Again, these were leads that we went on somebody's website, submitted it, and then they followed up. It was actually 4.47. 4.47 on average. So interestingly, when we look at best practice, when you look at best practice touches, you're looking at more in that 10 to 15 range. Now, some people say, Gabe, why the 10 to 15? Well, again, you've got to look at some of the different attributes. If I'm in a transactional high-velocity inbound model, you typically go a little bit higher. If you're in a strategic model that's relational, you might go a little bit lower in number. So we typically recommend what we call a 3 by 3 by 3 by 3 model. Now, I know and you, I think, mentioned voice messages in your world doesn't play as well as it does potentially in North America.
Yes, this is true.
Our foundational cadence says, hey, typically start by thinking about 3 phone calls, 3 voice messages, 3 email, and 3 social touches in about, so that's 12 total right there. Now, again, in your world where voicemails can't play a role, you'd probably want to up that game by a few extra to get into that 10 to 15. So we say, look, get 10 to 15 over typically a 2 to 4 week time frame.
Okay, so this is like the basic rule for start a good cadence, and then you fine tune based on your market and your target persona.
Yeah, so maybe let me just give a quick example, because sometimes that's a little bit confusing to people. So let's say you say, okay, Gabe, I believe you. I like your foundational cadence of 3 by 3 by 3 by 3. But I happen to be, let's say, a relational outbound kind of company, meaning I'm focusing on big deals, long sales cycle, and I'm going outbound. I'm going kind of cold to them. In that model, I may change it a little bit and say, why don't you go for a 3, 2, 4, 4? And again, I'm using some of our language. You'd have to apply it to your world, but that would be 3 phone calls, 2 voice messages, 4 emails, and 4 social touches. Now notice I've taken the phone down a little bit and I've upped the email and the social, because I'm in a relational outbound model. So we find in that model social and email is a little bit more effective. So I do a little bit more of those, and I start my cadence with those interactions. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes completely sense for me, at least. And probably you if you are in account base chasing whales and bigger deals, you're probably going to have a longer time period on the cadence, like 3 weeks or 4 weeks, right?
Yeah, that's right. So good question, or good kind of point there. So usually, a lot of people say, Gabe, why the 2 to 4 weeks? Again, if you're more of a strategic rep, you're going to probably take that cadence and make it a little bit longer. If you're a transactional rep, you're going to make that cadence a little bit shorter, right?
Perfect. And a lot of companies here in Brazil, they are just on the beginning to implement some kind of prospecting or sales development strategy.
Yeah.
What do you suggest to be a good first step for them to start in the right direction?
You know, the first thing you want to do is, especially if you're a small company, But, when I talk to most founders, I feel like they understand the concept of A/B split testing or testing in general. They say to me, Gabe, we've taken our product and we've been able to iterate on it and split test it and come out with a product that we think is very viable. Or they'll say, hey, in marketing, we've got a great website and we believe that, we've split tested our website and it's really performing well. My challenge to them is start to take the concept of testing and apply it to sales. So what I ask companies or reps to do is, rather than just, and this is what most people do, random cadences, random outreach strategies. How many times do you call them? I don't really know. What are you putting in your emails? I don't know. I just kind of do it however I want to do it. Get to a place, write it down on a paper with some of the stuff we've talked about today. Write a cadence strategy out on paper with a couple of voice messages or email messages. Again, with you more focused on email. Put one cadence and then do the same thing on a piece of paper. Write out another cadence based on some of the principles we've talked about. And then use the same principles that you do with your website and your product and test it out. And then, shoot me back a note or grab me on LinkedIn. I'd be interested to see. We got to get to a place. The mantra is the science of selling is testing. And so get to a place where you're starting to test some of these principles. And I promise you, when you do, just like with your product, just like with your website, you'll find incremental improvements in your contact rates and your conversion rates because you're actually applying that concept of testing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I give a tip from my own. I always recommend to founders to read the sales development playbook from Trish Bertuzzi before start doing that, because I think it's a good playbook of how to start doing sales development.
Yeah, great point. Love that book. Love Trish.
Cool. So to finish our podcast right now, Gabe, what do you think is going to be the future in sales prospecting?
Well, that's a loaded question. There's a lot of things I think, but if I tried to keep it a little bit more in the realm of what we're talking about, it would probably just kind of go, Diego, off what we've been talking about. Let's stick with cadence.
Yes.
So right now, most companies run a subjective cadence, right? They randomly reach out to people with a random number of touches and random content. Where we're going, step one is this systematic cadence strategy. So what you're going to be seeing is, and I get this actually right now, people submit their cadences to me fairly often. They'll email and ask me to give them feedback. But you're going to see almost like a store of best practice cadences that you can literally plug into your CRM and run those cadences and see which ones work best for you. So step one is kind of this systemized cadence where we really get into best practice, testing best practice cadences. Step two is going to be more around the content, because truthfully, in a cadence strategy, you can send, touches, number of touches is great and spacing is great, but content is king. Your message is usually trumps everything. So you're going to see more analysis and recommendations on content. So for example, I'm going to be writing an email and a system will actually tell me how to tweak my message. It'll recommend different types of attachments. It'll even recommend the optimal time to send an email so that I can maximize open rates, all in the name of kind of predictive cadence. So I'm seeing right now subjective cadence. I think step one is predictive cadence that has the ability to test and really dive deep into what's working and what's not working. And then step three gets into the predictive content where it's actually recommending, you should do this or that, or the time, and et cetera. So that's where I'm seeing it going.
That's perfect. That's a nice vision. Hopefully it's going to be concrete
What do you mean, hopefully? It's going to happen.
Perfect. So it's going to happen. Maybe it's already happening in the US and maybe starting, just giving the first steps here in Brazil.
It is. None of that's happening at the moment, but again, it's coming. Some of that stuff is definitely coming because we've got to, Diego. The problem is we can't be subjective anymore in sales. We've got to apply more data and science.
Yeah. Perfect, Gabe. I want to thank you so much for joining us here in Cast for Closers today. Thank you for share some of your knowledge in cadence and prospecting. And hopefully we can record another episode in the future.
Yeah, and again, thank you so much, Diego. And I always like to continue the conversation, so please grab me on LinkedIn, send me a note. Always happy to dialogue around this important topic.
Cool. And the final tip for everyone is please join the podcast that Gabe Larsen makes.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
that's
it's the Sales Acceleration Podcast, right?
Yep, we do the Sales Acceleration Podcast. We do it twice a week, and we bring on industry experts and talk about all things around demand generation, sales, and sales operations. So, check us out on iTunes or Stitcher, and love to have you join. Yeah,
I have it on my feed. Really, is really valuable content on sales. So please, people, join Gabe and listen to it as well. Okay, Gabe, bye.
Thank you.